Nick Claxton as a trade target for us. Makes sense. He's making 25 million. The Nets have a ton of cap space. They're one of two teams in the league that actively have cap space right now. So if the Celtics are looking to duck the salary cap or even the first apron, they're one of the teams that they're most likely going to have to do a deal with just because they can take back significantly more salary than they're putting out in a trade. And if we sent them Anthony Simons, for example, then he's making 27.6. So we could save that 2.6 this year, make some other moves to get us lower. I think 2.6 would get us to be around 2 million above the cap, or above the first apron. And then we're just like a cut Xavier Tillman away from being under the first apron. So they can provide us a lot of financial flexibility in a trade. Yo, what is up, guys? Joining you right after the Celtics 113-99 win over the Brooklyn Nets, putting them in the above 500 column for the first time all year. Gonna be recording this one solo tonight. Pretty good win overall. I don't know how much you can really take from this one as a guide on what this team is or who this team is, just because the Brooklyn Nets have been absolute garbage so far this year. I believe this puts them at 12-2, right in that tank off where they wanted to be this year. This was one of the more frustrating ones to watch just from a viewership point of view. I'm a Brooklyn native, so I needed to watch it. My League Pass didn't work, and my YouTube TV didn't work for this one, so I watched it through the Yes Network, which is the Brooklyn Nets-owned broadcast network. Made me a little jealous the Celtics don't have something similar. Apparently, after this, they're premiering a documentary called From Spartanburg to Brooklyn, the Noah Clowney story, presented by Qatar Airlines, which I would just have a lot of fun if Celtics also just produced documentaries on a random, Tuesday night for role players that have been here for 3 years. Watched a little bit of the intro to it. Doesn't seem like there's a ton that interesting about Noah Clowney. Seems like they just wanted to have a special on the guy, which maybe I'm just a sicko, but I would honestly enjoy like a 45-minute doc on like what was Sam Hauser's childhood like, you know? What was back in the day? What was Brandon Bass's upbringing? Like, not even... Maybe I'm underrating Noah Clowney here, but it just seems like a bit much to get him into a documentary this early on in his career. Celtics really shot their way out of this one. Lot of messy turnovers, lot of mistakes on defense, but when you shoot almost 50% from three and you're playing the Brooklyn Nets, you're going to win that game. It did seem like towards the end, fourth quarter, they really dialed it up down the stretch and almost just decided to stop making mistakes. So probably a situation where they weren't taking this team all that seriously coming into the game. Couple things I noticed that we haven't seen much of this year. First off, we got some Xavier Tillman minutes for the first time in a while. Only 5 minutes. He was a -5 and 5, 0-0-1. So I'm not sure that it's going to be a continuing trend to see him thrown out there. It does seem like Joe Mazzulla admitting that we could use some big help behind Garza and Queta. Garza had a pretty good game tonight, but still was struggling on defense. Big positive on offense. Today it wound up being in his favor, where he was a -15 in 20 minutes. Did get into foul trouble early, 4 fouls. in 20 minutes. I want to say the third one came when he had only been in for about 12. So that's really when he needed to sub out and Tillman needed to come in. Going forward, I'm not sure what the plan is for those minutes. It seems like one of the few things we're still figuring out about this team, even 15 games into the season. I'd love to see some Chris Boucher get another shot at it. He was kind of the bigger name of the offseason that we signed on one of those minimum deals. A few years ago, in Sixth Man of the Year contention with the Toronto Raptors, has always been like a really steady offensive four with some minutes at the five. Has some lapses on the defensive end. It seemed like it was really hustle that kept him off the floor in the beginning of the season. But as a, 7-minute a night guy, I could totally see him being impactful there. And then also Amari Williams, just giving him a shot. One of our two-way guys has been killing it up in Maine. So we can play him up to 50 games a year on his current two-way contract. So in a few games, he'll be good to play out the rest of the season, so I don't think that's much of a concern anymore. Xavier Tillman just looked like he couldn't move out there. In his 5 minutes, there was at least 3 plays where the defense saw him guarding the big and just lobbed it over. And I don't think he jumped on one of those. It's kind of a testament to Xavier Tillman as a big that he can stay on an NBA basketball court when he just can't jump. That jumping's kind of a big part of playing basketball. If you've ever played even Simons all on the court at the same time, only out there for about 4 or 5 minutes, but it was a positive overall. The other 2 guys on the court were Neemias Queta and Jordan Walsh. So we definitely tried to pack the back line with some like size and defense, just because that's a very small front court for those minutes. Kind of makes sense that we would get to that lineup at some point this season, just because when Jaylen Brown's off the court, we really need offense out there, and we don't have a ton of offense coming from the big positions on this team. We just have those 3 guards who are really the only other guys trusted to initiate offense. I've talked at length on this podcast about how Anthony Simons really needs to be on the court every minute Jaylen Brown's not on the court, because those guys play such a similar role as play finishers, where they're the ones who you kind of want taking the last shot of the possession, or want the defense to have to maneuver to stop them from scoring, to open up things for other people. I just don't know if Joe Mazzulla really trusts Anthony Simons as a playmaker out there, where this was one of his better games assist-wise. Wound up with 5 assists, but also 3 turnovers. I did like his kind of commitment to try to pass the ball more in this game, so hopefully those turnovers improve, but it does seem like a logical next step to kind of get him out there with Pritchard and Derek White. That way, we trust both those guys. We have enough playmaking. We have more than enough shooting on the floor. And between the 3 of them, they can run a high-level offense. And if you just put 2 purely defensive guys out there with him, then you can kind of strike a balance. We only saw that lineup for a very short period of time, but I do think that if we saw it for longer, against a good team, they would probably start to find ways to attack it, just because when you have Anthony Simons or Derek White guarding your 3 position, you're going to have a major size advantage there. So against Brooklyn, when Michael Porter's on the bench, you can totally get away with that. But against some of these better teams, they're going to figure out where those mismatches are and get the switch. So I am interested to see how we kind of use that lineup in the future, just because I do think it solves a lot of the story of the game. 19 turnovers overall. That's almost twice what the Celtics were averaging coming into this game. We were averaging 10 turnovers a game, which was leading the league as the lowest. I think second was OKC, averaging 12. Super awesome low turnovers. It's one of the reasons the Celtics have had a really good plus minus this year and find themselves in the win column, even though they've been struggling and rebounding in a bunch of different areas. Just taking care of the ball in the NBA will get you up to a 500 team with that plus a couple scores. So a little bit concerning there. Hopefully it's just a case where they were underestimating the Brooklyn Nets. It seemed like the last few games they have gotten a little bit more aggressive with their passing, which overall is awesome. But against the Clippers and I believe it was, forget who we played against, Memphis. Memphis and the Clippers just did not put ball pressure on any of our guys the last two games. So they were able to put up really impressive passing performances where they were just like shooting the ball across court and doing these like really fast passes where they go between like 3 or 4 guys. And those are really effective passes if they make it through to corner shooters just wide open. So our offense looked awesome in those games. But I think coming into the Brooklyn game tonight, they're not a super talented team, but they do have some long athletes who can defend. And we're trying to win this game. I mean, they're a well-coached team, super young. A lot of guys were out there just kind of hustling to make their mark on the game, and it's the kind of their first impressions in the NBA. So I think they were giving us a lot more ball pressure than we had come accustomed to over the last stretch of games, which closed a lot of those passing windows for us. So I think it was a mix of Celtics kind of getting used to some laxer defenses and being a little aggressive with the pass, and then just not taking this team as seriously as we could have. Jaylen Brown had 8 turnovers. In some ways, this was one of his rougher games, I thought. There was a lot of time he was going to the rim, taking threes, and shooting the mid-range. So, love the approach there, where he's trying to be that 3-level scorer. I think earlier in the season he became a little bit heavy on just the mid-range shots, where we're seeing him now kind of work his way into being a more well-balanced scorer, which this team will need if we're going to have any success down the stretch. He was a little bit better at getting to the free throw line here, but there was a ton of possessions where he went to the rim, and it kind of seemed like he didn't have a plan, where he would go up. If the big fouled him, great. Like, that's a guaranteed trip to the line. Awesome possession. But if he went up and the big just stayed vertical, then he was just kind of lost up there and would end up missing a layup. I think that as these games get more competitive and we go up against better big men than, Noah Clowney, Duron Sharp types, then the scouting report on Jaylen Brown is going to be, if play up on him, tempt him to go to the rim, and then have the big man just stay vertical. Because if you can prevent him from taking a mid-ranger or a 3 without fouling, and then you can get him to try to be an at-the-rim finisher, then it can be easy to stop. So it's not the biggest deal in the world, but I think he either needs to develop in a way similar to what we saw with Jason Tatum, where he's a good finisher, but he needs to learn how to draw a foul at the rim. And that's something that only really comes with time and trying different things to get the ref's attention in those situations. Some guys develop like a really good swing through with their arms as they go up. Just ways of kind of getting tangled with the big as you're in your upward motion so that you're guaranteed that foul look. Because right now he's kind of just jumping and then hoping he gets fouled or that a lane to the basket opens up, which with his athleticism and finishing, it erases a lot of those mistakes. But it is something that as defenses kind of key in on him as the number one guy this season, I could see being an issue. Still really efficient overall, minus the turnovers. 9 of 19 field goal, 3 of 7 on threes. I'm glad to see him and also a lot of guys in this team kind of get back to their shooting stroke. Peyton Pritchard went 5 of 12, but I believe at one point he was 5 of 9. He's never been below, 41, 42% from three, which is super elite. This season, he's shooting just about league average. Shot 40% tonight. Hopefully that's a sign of things to come. Taylor Shireman was kind of interesting in this game. 1 of 2 from three. It should have been 2 of 3 from three. He hit one, but Anthony Simons had kind of a dumb moving screen foul as it was going in, so that did not get counted. He seemed to be trying a lot of behind the back passes in this game, which they all ended up where they were supposed to go, and he had no turnovers. So not a concern really, but just a big surprise to me, who I don't think I've really seen Baylor Shireman try to get all that fancy with passes. Even, late last season, in college, in summer league, this game he really seemed to be trying something out where he threw 2 just no look behind the back passes, which got to where they were supposed to go, but they did seem like they weren't as crisp as like a normal pass. So one was to Cato, one was to Josh Minot, and they both seemed really like they weren't expecting Baylor Shireman to just fire off like a J-Will behind the back trick pass mid-game. And I'm wondering if that's something he's trying to kind of incorporate into his game. Just because on this team, it seems like the forward minutes, there's a ton of competition for right now. You have Jordan Walsh, Josh Minot, Hugo Gonzalez, Sam Hauser, and then when Tatum comes back, that's going to be another 40 minutes just taken out of that rotation. So I don't know if he kind of sees the writing on the wall that he's kind of a tweener, like a 2-3, but if he can shape his game a little bit more to being that off-ball shooting guard who can play make a little, dribble a little, then there's a much bigger avenue for him to get minutes on this team, where he's the third guard off the bench or the fourth guard this season, and then the third guard once Anthony Simons either walks away from this team in the offseason or is traded mid-season. Like we've talked about before, just because of his contract, I don't know that there's a huge long-term fit for him here. So once you kind of project forward to Anthony Simons not being on this team in some way, shape, or form, then you can kind of see where Baylor Shireman is really the only guard left, unless Hugo kind of reclaims that and can show a lot more playmaking than he has so far this year. One thing that's gotten talked about a lot in Celtics media circles with the regard to the Brooklyn Nets is Nick Claxton as a trade target for us. In some ways, this makes a lot of sense. He's making $25 million a year, locked in for 3 years. Really good defensive center. He has the bonus of being a guy who can switch out to the perimeter, but also be a high-level rim protector and just get a ton of rebounds. Tonight, he was 7, 11, and 3. It looked like he was really strong, especially when he was going up against Luka Garza. and he could kind of just move him wherever he wanted and jump higher than him, grab the rebound. It's always awesome to be just significantly more athletic than the guy you're matched up with. That helps a ton. Um, Reason it makes sense, he's making 25 million. The Nets have a ton of cap space. They're one of two teams in the league that actively have cap space right now. So if the Celtics are looking to duck the salary cap or even the first apron, they're one of the teams that they're most likely going to have to do a deal with. Just because they can take back significantly more salary than they're putting out in a trade. And if we sent them Anthony Simons, for example, then he's making 27.6. So we could save that 2.6 this year, make some other moves to get us lower. I think 2.6 would get us to be around 2 million above the cap, which then, or above the first apron, and then we're just like a cut Xavier Tillman away from being under the first apron. So they can provide us a lot of financial flexibility in a trade. They could even take back multiple contracts. Like if we wanted to throw in a Xavier Tillman just to get a little bit extra money off the cap, or even a Sam Hauser if we really needed to duck the tax this year. I'm not saying I would want us to do that because he is just a valuable player and he's on a very reasonable contract locked up for the long term. But if this new ownership group has a directive where they're saying you need to get under the tax, the easiest way to make the math work is to go to, I think Brooklyn and then the Jazz are the other team that have just open cap space right now. Send them a bunch of guys for one guy in return. Nick Claxton as a player, I understand we have a big hole at the 5 right now. I'm not completely sold on it, if I'm being honest. I really like Nick Claxton's defensive game. Offensively, I think he should be just like a run and dunk big man. That's what his skill set is. Sometimes he tries to kind of post up a little bit more. Some of that's because he's on the Nets. Biggest issue with him is free throws. This year, he seems to have gotten hot through the first 15 games of the season, shooting above 70%. And if that continues, then I might be sold on him. But you have to kind of assume that's going to return to level, which in past seasons he's been like a 38, 40% free throw shooter, which if that's a constraint for a big in the NBA, you're just not going to be able to play those guys down the stretch of big playoffs. And whoever we want as our center going forward is going to have to play in playoff games. And if we're spending $25 million on him, that's going to lock up enough cap that we're not going to be able to get another center in. You know, he's going to be the center. And if he can't close games, then we're paying $25 million for essentially a backup center. Even if you have like a him start, K to finish games, which he would be a good part of a rotation, but just since he's making starter money, you can't have him then be your backup center. I had a few trades we were going to go through. Just a couple trade targets, I guess. The Clippers haven't been off to a hot start this year. And one guy I was looking at from them is John Collins. Now, John Collins also makes $25 million a year, but he is expiring this year. So even if this trade doesn't happen, I think he would be a good target with our mid-level. I would expect him to sign for a team in the offseason anywhere between like $10 million to $14 million. He's a little overpaid this year, but that's going to come down. If You remember he got this contract because he was on the Hawks with that Trae Young team, and he was kind of the young co-star to Trae Young. So he got like his max rookie extension, which for a rookie who hasn't made an all-star team, it's a pretty reasonable max extension. But $26 million a year, he's not going to be the potential kind of co-star that they thought he was going to be with the Hawks. But he's a guy who can put up 12 and 8, shoots about 36% from three, so a little bit stretchy. Good, not great defender, I'd say. He's long and can give you a little bit of extra rim protection, can box out, get rebounds. I think the trade this year would be pretty simple, just him for Simons. They make essentially the identical amount of money for this season. One makes 25.8, one makes 26.2. So a trade would work with the salaries there. You'd probably need to incentivize the Clippers a little bit, but if we get to the trade deadline and they're continuing to lose at this rate, then I just don't see them re-signing John Collins. Because right now, they have Kawhi and James Harden for this year and next year. Then their cap is just kind of open after that, with the exception of Zubac, who's on a remarkably team-friendly deal. So he's making $18 a year. If you're the Clippers, your fastest way to rebuild is through cap space. So I just don't see them locking up John Collins long term. Maybe they'd offer him a 1 year, but they're not going to offer him anything longer than that. And if you're John Collins, you're going to be looking elsewhere. So I don't know that we would need that much if they're out of playoff contention by the deadline. So I was looking at Anthony Simons and then 2 seconds. Our 2026, which Atlanta already holds rights to, and that to swap, and our 2031, which Utah already owns swap rights on. So 2 second rounders, I think those are a little bit more valuable to a team like the Clippers just because they are going to have a ton of roster spots to fill over the next few years. So if you're looking at moving on from the Kawhi and James Harden era, having cheap contracts where you can just kind of work out guys, especially if you're kind of going all in on a cap space rebuild, where you're saying, okay, 2 years from now, James Harden comes off, Kawhi comes off. We're going to have completely clean books except for Zubac making $18 million a year. We have like 2.5 max cap hole spots, where in LA 2027 is going to be a huge free agent market. I know Giannis and Jokic are the two big ones everyone talks about, but that's going to be the next year where there's just a bunch of guys coming up. So if you say to them, you know, we have some young guys on cheap deals, we have cap space for 2 guys to team up, we have, you know, a borderline all-star center to play with, that could be an intriguing package for some guys and probably the easiest way for them to get back into contention. So just the more swings between now and then they have at unlocking some cheap second-round talent means more to them than a team like the Celtics, where we're just struggling to get our second-round picks to get any playing time on the court, where as they age out, they're going to just free up those minutes and free up those roster spots. The other one I looked at for the Clippers was Brook Lopez. They signed him this offseason, signed this year and next year, $8.7 million. The deal I came up with would be Brook Lopez and Cam Christie for Sam Hauser and Xavier Tillman. I don't know if this is one I would accept if I was Brad Stevens, just because Sam Hauser's on $10 million a year, which is great value for what he brings this team, especially with his shooting. Part of it is I do like Cam Christie. He's a recent second-round pick of theirs. Good defender, good shooter. Just kind of a hustle 3-and-D 2-guard who I think can kind of provide like a rotational wing to replace Sam Hauser. And then Brook Lopez is much older, but he would be a cheap stopgap at center for this year and next year as kind of like a three-headed monster center rotation with Kada and then somebody else we bring in on the mid-level deal. I don't think he's really the Brook Lopez of old, where, you know, when he was on those Bucks teams, he was all defensive team, shooting 40+% from three. But if he can be a guy who gives us defense, rim protection, and can hit corner threes for us, especially when Tatum's on the court, that's going to be insanely valuable. So I'm not sold yet on a Nick Claxton deal. I think if there was going to be a deal, I would be much more interested in like a Day'Ron Sharpe off that team, just because the value of that contract is so much better. Making 5.5. Maybe you do like a Anthony Simons for Day'Ron Sharpe and Terrence Mann, who's a contract they took a pick to take, making $15 million a year. So that would clear up a lot of cap space for them long term, but would drop us just below the tax this year, give us kind of a replacement guard off the bench and a cheap young center. I don't know if I'm taking that if I'm Brooklyn, just because they need a lot of swings at the tree, you know? Like, they don't have a plan for the future of like, okay, these are our guys yet. They just have a roster full of young guys and a lot of playing time for them. Figure out who's going to be who. Igor, the recent first round pick, played great tonight. I know they're pretty high on Noah Clowney. I mean, they're doing a whole documentary about him. But Day'Ron Sharpe's another one of those guys where I think he's only 23, 24 on a cheap deal. Maybe he breaks out in the next few years, and then that's one of your starting bigs. Or maybe he's just your backup big for the next Nets run. So if I was them, I wouldn't be giving up on those guys, even if I could get a draft pick and free up some cap space. But you never know. So those are some guys I would call about. Not super high on Nick Claxton, but we're going to see this team again on Friday for an NBA Cup game. NBA Cup odds are almost zero at this point, but I am going to be frustrated if we do another thing like we did with the Magic, where we have back-to-back and we win the non-Cup game easily and then struggle in the Cup game. Just because I think the Cup's fun, and in a year where we're not competing for the NBA championship, it would be nice just to like make it to Vegas and have a trophy to cheer for. Till then, that's it for the Jays and Confused podcast. Thank you all for tuning in. Catch you next time.